Okay, good morning, everyone. It's 11 o'clock or shortly after, and we're going to kick off our second session of the day, the state and EJ, prioritizing EJ in Michigan. Welcome. My name is Jim Ostrowski. I'm just going to kick it off with some housekeeping and then turn it over to Regina. So a couple housekeeping things you should know about, and that's the same for all the sessions we'll be hosting throughout the conference. That's all lines are muted and will remain muted. We are also recording each session, and we're doing our best to post those sessions recordings as soon as we can on the conference website, and you'll be getting notifications when that occurs as well. So you'll be able to find those there in case you miss a session and want to go back and take a look at it. How to ask questions during this session and all the sessions is that in your Zoom, if you're watching via Zoom, on your Zoom toolbar, you can go to the Q&A box and type your question in there. And when we do Q&A, you'll be able to, we'll go through those questions, as many as we can. Also, if you're using Whova on your laptop or on your phone, you can type questions into the Whova app and we'll be monitoring that as well. So that's all I have for housekeeping. Regina, go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you, Jim. I'm going to share my screen, but before I get going, I want to thank you all for joining us for the first session of Michigan's first Environmental Justice Conference. If you were with us during the opening session, you know that we have a very full next few days. So I'm going to get going. And, you know, I am the Environmental Justice Public Advocate. I lead the Office of Environmental Justice Public Advocate, and I want to share with you just a few slides to talk about the office, talk about the work that we're doing. And then I'm joined by several other folks who I will introduce you to along the way, including Katie Cruz, who is part of the Office of Environmental Justice Public Advocate team, Kara Cook from the Governor's Office, Kelly Rose from the Michigan State Housing Development Authority, and Mona Monroe-Eunice, who is part of the Michigan Advisory Council on Environmental Justice and leads the environmental transformational movement of Flint. So I'm going to share my screen so we can get going. All right. Thank you, everybody. So I wanted to start out by talking a little bit about how the Office of Environmental Justice was created. So Governor Whitmer created the Office of Environmental Justice Public Advocate and the role of the Environmental Justice Public Advocate by executive order early in her administration in 2019. It was created as a Type 1 agency, which means it's connected to the governor's office, but sits in the executive office of the Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, or EGLE. And in addition to that, the Interagency Response Team was created as part of that executive order. So before we get going, I want to make sure we're all grounded in the same perspective of what we talk about when we talk about environmental justice. So one of the things that we did early on is work with both the Interagency Environmental Justice Response Team and the Michigan Advisory Council on Environmental Justice, or the MACEJ, to work through a Michigan-specific definition of environmental justice based on the EPA's definition. And so I'm going to read this for you. And it is: environmental justice is the equitable treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, ability, or income, and is critical to the development and application of laws, regulations, and policies that affect the environment, as well as the places that people live, work, play, worship, and learn. So what do we mean when we talk about equitable treatment? Really, it means no group of people bears a disproportionate share of the negative consequences of governmental actions or commercial operations and policies, and that all people benefit from the application of those laws and regulations. And, you know, prioritizing the elimination of barriers like poverty and lack of access, and really working to, you know, repair systemic injustices. And when we talk about meaningful involvement, we really are talking about providing people the opportunity to influence state agency decisions, to participate in decisions that affect them and their environment or their health. That decision makers seek out and facilitate the involvement of those who are potentially affected, and that people's concerns are considered in the decision-making process. So I wanted to back up and talk a little bit about Michigan and environmental justice. So as I mentioned, the Interagency Environmental Justice Response Team began meeting in July of 2019. And of that group, we created several work groups that were convened in the fall. The Michigan Advisory Council on Environmental Justice, the state's first environmental justice advisory council, began meeting in February of 2020. And the goal here is to make sure that we're engaging with communities on all levels and through all departments across the state and really integrating environmental justice. And so this is just kind of a quick flow chart as to how our environmental justice work flows in Michigan, staying connected, ongoing to the work of the interagency team, the advisory council, and the 4 work groups focused on communications and outreach and planning and policy and training and research and data. You'll hear more about that work as we go through the conference. Much of it is connected to some of the sessions, including the EJ screening tool session later today. So I just wanted to shout out the Office of Environmental Justice Public Advocate team. Katie Cruz, who I mentioned, you'll hear from shortly, and Anna Bunting, who is our project assistant. So I'm not going to go through all these, but essentially the role of the EJ Public Advocate is to be both an internal and external advocate, and to really work to accept and investigate complaints, as well as work proactively to address environmental injustices. And so back to the interagency response team, these are the departments that were initially included in the executive order. And as we started the work, we realized we needed other departments at that table, including the Michigan State Housing Development Authority and others. So this will show some interconnectivity between all of the work that happens at the government and state level: environment, health, education, criminal justice, economic well-being. It looks really busy, but it essentially shows the intersection of all of those areas and why it was so important to have different departments at the table as we looked at addressing structural inequities and institutional policies and norms and laws that really had adverse impacts on certain communities. So I'm going to back up and give you a little history of environmental justice in Michigan. We're all familiar with the Flint water crisis. It really served as a turning point in the genesis for creating this Office of Environmental Justice Public Advocate. Both the last 2 administrations had previous attempts at addressing environmental justice, including working groups and task force. And out of the last administration's working group, there were 33 recommendations that came out that really serves as the basis for what we prioritize in our work, including the planning of this conference. So just wanted to touch on the connectivity between our work on environmental justice and civil rights. The environmental justice movement was really born of the civil rights movement, and it's really about no person in the United States on the basis of race, color, national origin, or limited English proficiency should be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefit of, or be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. And so if you step back and look at Michigan, there have been times over history, including related to Flint, that there have been complaints filed with the EPA. And since our office was created and in response to one of the last discrimination complaints filed with the EPA, we had to work forward from the EGLE perspective in creating some things. One of those was a non-discrimination policy specific to EGLE. The other was the naming of a non-discrimination coordinator, who is Katie Cruz, the establishment of a grievance procedure, notice of non-discrimination at all of Eagle's facilities posted prominently so that it can be seen, and the development of Eagle's first limited English proficiency plan. So I'm going to talk real quickly about some of the efforts that we've had to really reach out to community this year in 2021. We just completed 8 regional roundtables in regions across the state, small group conversations. We really wanted to be able to do these in person, so we pushed them forward. They were originally planned for last year, thinking that we might be able to do that. But these were held virtually, given that we are still working our way through the pandemic. And so we very intentionally pulled together a small group of folks to just have dialogue about their region and communities on environmental justice, challenges and opportunities, and collaboration and partnerships, and what's working and what's not. Very robust conversations all over the state. We started in the Upper Peninsula, moved to the Northern Lower Peninsula, included the Thumb and the central part of the state, and Detroit as its own region, and Southeast Michigan and Flint as its own region, and the Southwest side of the state. So of those roundtables, there were a total of 101 participants across those, with a very intentional mix of community and organizations, local government and businesses, and really providing one of many mechanisms for community feedback. So I wanted to share our website, which is at michigan.gov/environmental justice. And you can learn more about our work and see the limited English proficiency plan and see who's on the Advisory Council on Environmental Justice. I'm going to hand things over and stop sharing my screen to Kara Cook to talk a little bit about the perspective of from the governor's office and Kara's connectivity to our work as it relates to environmental justice in the state. Kara?
Thanks, Regina. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So Regina, you hit on a lot of the things that I always like to hit on what we do and why we've done it in Michigan. But I think it's really important to kind of go back. I've actually been with the governor's team since the transition, when we were really figuring out what her priorities were going to be, especially for that first 100 days and going into the first year. And one of the main things that continued to come back up is environmental injustices, especially post the Flint water crisis, and how we could set up state government to make sure that we did as much as possible, because we cannot avoid every instance that we have, to make sure something like that never happens again. So she really hit the ground running with her second executive order, really outlining all of our work on environmental justice in Michigan. And one of the things that was included within that Regina just outlined was our EJ response team. And that was a really important piece to make sure that we had all of our state departments that at times can be really siloed with critical issues, to make sure that we had the governor's office actively involved. So I actually staff her on that council, and figure out how we can make sure that the governor is fully up to speed, and that if there are any hiccups in working with different departments, because we have a very large bureaucracy of over 80,000 state employees that are doing a lot of this work, we really just wanted to make sure that there was a place where we could institutionalize this work. As Regina mentioned, previous administrations have done councils and different work groups on this, but what we wanted was to make it a critical part of state government going forward. While the governor still has a lot of time left in her term here, and hopefully a second, we wanted to make sure, regardless of who's in office, that we make progress towards this work so it stays. And again, Regina mentioned some of this, but originally this was a really small group of people that we were going to bring together to talk about the importance of integrating environmental justice across all state departments. And now we have representation from all of our cabinet members, departments, including some type 1 agencies as well. And through that process, it's been really, really interesting to watch the dedicated state employees try to learn about environmental justice. It's similar to how we deal with communities. We realized really quickly that we had to meet state departmental employee staff exactly where they were, because a lot of people didn't sign up for this work in state government, have been in for 30 years and have never been asked to think about environmental justice issues. So Regina and Katie and other folks on the team did a lot of education to make sure that they understood what their privileges were in being able to tackle some of this work. So, you know, it's been pretty incredible to watch their work. We meet, as Regina said, monthly to figure out what this is. And we've actually started really integrating this into departmental decisions. I know we talk a lot about process, which can be a little frustrating because there's a lot of work that needs to happen right now, but we have started doing some of those actionable items. I look back to the work that I led with Director Clark on our executive directive that set Michigan on a path to become 100% decarbonized by 2050. And we worked with not only the EJ response team, but also the Michigan Advisory Council on Environmental Justice to make sure that there were critical pieces on environmental justice within that order. It was not appropriate for us to move forward, especially during the global pandemic when we dealt with so much racial unrest, to move forward on a climate change proposal that did not have environmental justice at the absolute core. So we worked closely with Eagle's staff and our Michigan Public Service Commission to make sure that in our utilities long-term energy planning that they actually considered environmental justice and public health impacts. So we've been working actively in this response team to figure out exactly how to execute that. We also worked really closely with the Department of Treasury, which is a part of this team, on the Energy Transition Impact Project to make sure while communities are transitioning away from things like ICE vehicles or coal plants, that they have the tools that they need to retrain their workers, make sure that we keep that tax base in communities and that no communities get left behind as we're moving things forward. So this really is something that we've tried to integrate in all of our work and make sure it's not just an add-on. We really want to figure out the best ways that we can connect all of the resources to improve people's lives. And this work is really hard. And this group has been tasked with a lot with Regina at the helm, but we've already made a lot of progress. We do have a ton of progress that we still need to continue to make because things are not at all perfect, and you will not hear from our team, even at the governor's office, that we have done a perfect job on everything. But I think we have a really great opportunity with the team here, and it's also been fantastic to see the work that Regina has laid out in Michigan actually be copied in what we're seeing at the federal level right now. They're using a lot of this response team, our councils, to really make sure that the blueprint that we've outlined here that has been really successful is going to be successful as we move forward.
Thank you so much, Kara. It is really good to have you at every meeting of both the MAC-EJ and the Interagency Response Team. Really appreciate that. I'm going to hand things over to Katie Cruz to talk a little bit about her work on the team. I don't know what I'd do without Katie. As excited and active as I am, Katie is like my reality check of, okay, we're already doing this and this and this. What else can we do? Because I will just keep pushing forward. So thank you, Katie, for all you do. I will hand it over to you.
Thanks, Regina, and welcome everyone. I'm really excited about the interest and participation we've had in this conference and excited for the next 3 days. I'm going to share my screen and talk a little bit about our work with tribal governments. All right, so I'm going to start just talking a little bit about Michigan's policies. The 2002 government-to-government accord was signed by then Governor Engler and the 12 federally recognized tribes of Michigan and provides commitments from both the state and the tribes and serves as an acknowledgement by the state of each tribe's sovereignty and right to self-governance and self-determination, and as a commitment by the state to use a process of consultation with the tribes to minimize and avoid disputes. The accord also establishes a governor's advisor on tribal state affairs and requires each executive branch state department designate a tribal liaison. So I serve as Eagle's tribal liaison. Since 2002, the accord has been reaffirmed by every governor, including Governor Whitmer, with Executive Directive 2019-17. which reaffirms, implements, formalizes, and extends the commitments made by the state of Michigan in the 2002 Accord. First, it ensures all state departments are aware of and adhere to certain fundamental principles regarding government-to-government relations with tribes. Second, it lays out a process of tribal consultation. And third, it builds into the operations of the state of Michigan the infrastructure necessary to ensure the objectives of the directive and the Accord are realized as fully as possible, including requiring every state agency to develop and implement a consultation policy. EGLE's policy on consultation and coordination with tribal governments outlines a 4-step consultation process, including identification of an activity that may be appropriate for consultation and has implication for tribes, notification once an activity is identified, input regarding the action or activity, and follow-up to provide feedback to explain how the input was considered in the final decision or action. Our policy also recognizes that open communication and robust collaboration with tribal partners is essential to accountability and success, and encourages the development of meaningful partnerships and collaborative efforts with the tribes. It is the policy of EGLE to continually improve communication, coordination, and collaboration with tribes. This can and is accomplished through a variety of methods, including regularly scheduled interactions between EGLE and tribal staff, participation and attendance at tribal meetings and outreach events, providing and partnering in technical assistance, grants, and training opportunities, and collaboration on non-regulatory programs such as air quality monitoring, water quality monitoring, and watershed management. So I'd like to highlight just a couple of our collaborative efforts. First is the Michigan Wild Rice Initiative, which stems from a collective understanding among state and tribal governments that the protection and restoration of wild rice in Michigan should be elevated in importance. It brings together specialists and managers from all 12 federally recognized tribes, multiple state departments and federal agencies, and others to share information, coordinate approaches, and elevate awareness about wild rice conservation and restoration. The initiative is composed of a Wild Rice Initiative team with representatives from each tribe's state agencies and other partners, as well as several subcommittees focused on specific topics such as education and outreach and monitoring and restoration. Second, we just wrapped up what we hope to be an annual tribal state water monitoring collaboration meeting. We originally scheduled this for last year, but had to postpone due to the pandemic. This year, we held 4 virtual sessions, as you can see here. Recognizing that all 12 tribal governments in Michigan have water quality programs, and EGLE is conducting a variety of monitoring efforts across the state. The purpose of the meeting is to discuss statewide water quality monitoring, identify potential overlap and ways to focus resources, identify opportunities for collaboration on monitoring, restoration efforts, and training, and to discuss innovative approaches and projects. We really value our partnership with tribal governments and the great work they all are doing on our shared goal of protecting human health and the environment. With that, I will turn it back over to Regina.
Thank you so much, Katie. Appreciate all that you do in working with our tribal governments. That is really important work and part of our environmental justice work moving forward. I wanted to turn the question, the opportunity to ask a couple questions of folks who are participants, excuse me, in our Mackie-J. I'm gonna start with Mona Monroe Eunice. Mona, who I introduced earlier, is joining us from Flint. She is part of our Mackie-J and does amazing work in communities and neighborhoods in Flint. So Mona, I'm going to give you an opportunity to talk about your experience as part of the Mackie-J and the work you do in Flint.
Great, thank you. Hi everyone, thanks for being here today. My name is Mona Monroe Eunice, and I'm with an organization, a grassroots environmental justice organization called the Environmental Transformation Movement of Flint. We do three kind of overarching things. One is we support residents in building their capacity to address environmental justice issues in Flint. We have a whole, beyond water, there's water obviously, but also legacy pollution issues, blight. There's a whole host of ways that environmental justice intersects with our lives on a day-to-day basis. So it can't be just one organization. So we want to build up everybody's ability to make the changes that we want to see. We also do direct issue advocacy. And then we support policy change and really help residents connect to data to make, to inform their advocacy and decision making, and also act as a bridge to decision makers to make sure that resident voices are being heard and actually not just heard, but really listened to and taken into account. So that's just a little bit of background on what we do. We're a volunteer-run organization, so we're small and mighty, and we do a lot. I'm very privileged to serve on the MAC-EJ because it's really been an opportunity to elevate not only what we're seeing here in Flint, but because it's a very integrated group with a lot of different perspectives coming from air and land and water, tribal representation, which is essential. I just want to lift that up too, because again, that all these facets of environmental justice cannot be an afterthought, right? Like we all have to be at the table. And it's really been a wonderful opportunity to talk through where the challenging spots are. So some of the sessions that are coming later, dealing with like air quality monitoring, for example, permitting. These are challenging issues in Michigan for communities to be heard and for the community input process to actually result in change to permitting based on feedback from affected communities. So, I think one of the things that's been fantastic about serving on the MAC-EJ is that Regina and her team are very responsive and come from backgrounds where they have been environmental justice advocates themselves. Like they feel this work because they've lived it, right? They're not just people who got plopped into these positions. They have a track record of addressing environmental justice. And so when the coronavirus pandemic started, one of the things that got elevated through the MAC-EJ, and I just want to lift up Monica Lewis-Patrick and Justin Unwenu and others for organizing around this, was to say, we cannot have people getting their water shut off during this pandemic. We know that we're already having people need to be able to be washing their hands and staying healthy and hydrated, and having access to water is absolutely essential. And in communities like Flint and Detroit, where we have extremely high water bills and have had issues with families getting cut off of water for non-payment, it was, I think, a real win for the MAC-EJ to be able to elevate this concern through the EJ Public Advocate and up through the governor, and that's where the ban on water shutoffs came from. Now, we'd like to see that continue because even without a pandemic, sanitation and access to water are essential for our lives. But I think it was a big win. This conference came in the sessions, the topics, and let me just say, nobody's asked me to say any of this. I'm just speaking from the heart. The sessions that are part of this conference and the fact that we're having this conference came out of the MAC-EJ saying we need to have these conversations statewide. We need to be able to bring more voices in and also to get really drilled down on where the challenging spots are, and then understand through our experience on the MAC-EJ and to like broaden the conversation, where the challenges, like again, I'm just speaking for myself here, the Michigan Legislature has a role in changing environmental policies in Michigan. They set the legislation that Eagle has to respond to. And so if there are issues in the legislation, then it affects our lives at the local community level because it shapes the permitting process and it shapes the tools that we have to lift our voices and make change. And so it's been, I think, a really important experience to really figure out where we need to be making the change and the role of community in that. And there is a role of community because we're the advocates, right? Once we understand where the sticking points are, it's our role to organize around that change and to inform what the change should be, obviously. So, and I will just say, in Flint, with the legacy issues, including brownfields, we have sites that had literally hundreds of former factory sites. So we're doing work to bring more community voices in to hear how they want to see the future. So we really, I think these are all conversations that we're having on our local level that get elevated up through the MACI-J to see, what resources are out there from the state, who we need to be talking with, and also just really, the MACI-J has really been focusing on process and policy change as well within Eagle and with the interagency working group where it makes sense. So those are my initial thoughts. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Mona, and thank you for lifting up the work, particularly around the water shutoffs last year. We really appreciate the fact, and I know it was born of just advocates trying to make things happen. We were meeting every 2 weeks for about 4 months in the throes of it to really move forward some of that agenda. And it is your job, but it's not your job. And so it might be easier for someone like me who gets to be in those meetings as part of many meetings to try to move things forward as my job. But I really appreciate you and the other folks who play a role on the MACI-J and have been so committed to the work and so vocal, although I never have to worry about my activist and advocate friends being vocal, but really pushing us to do better. I really appreciate your role in that. Thank you so much for that. I also
I would love to say something to Mona quickly. You said a lot of really great things there. I guess the one thing that I just want to reiterate is the MACI-J is really where our experts come from and where we get our ideas. So while Regina has the title of our EJ public advocate and we have folks like policy advisors like me, we could not do this work without the MACI-J and listening to experts from the community, because you're not just advocates, you understand things that me, the city of Lansing, working for the governor with a lot of privilege, could not understand. So I just want to double down on that and say how important the work of the Michigan Advisory Council on Environmental Justice is.
Well, thanks for making it a real thing, because it's not just a council that's there to check a box.
Thank you so much for that, Mona. And, Kara's actually, spot on in saying it really moves us to get passionate about the work. And you mentioned, you and I have crossed paths in former lives as advocates, right? In my former work with the Sierra Club, I was on the flip side of this work, advocating the government. One of my lines when I first started meeting with folks at Eagle was, if I ever yelled at you at a hearing, I'm sorry, right? Let's be friends, let's work together, because you get really passionate about the things you care about. So thank you, Mona. And I wanted to take a little time to talk to Kelly about the work of MISHDA as one of the departments invited later to the interagency response team. They weren't in the original executive order, but we having a background in housing advocacy, I realized they needed to be at the table, because environmental justice communities often are very challenged when it comes to housing and affordable housing. And so Kelly, tell us about kind of what you do at MISHDA and why the connectivity between your work and MISHDA's work and the environmental justice response team and being at that table is so important.
Sure. Thank you, Regina. First off, I guess I just want to recognize that we know that there's been a long history of environmental injustice in the housing space. Hundreds of years of lower income areas being either downwind or down water of environmental pollutants, and that we know that within our policies and practices within the housing that we finance, it's very important for us to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to make sure that our housing is placed in areas of high opportunity and that it's safe, that it's safe from whether there were prior uses on that land, that everything's through the environmental review process is being taken care of, and that we're moving things forward as much as possible in terms of the environmental sustainability of the projects that we're funding, so that the impact on the environment is less and the materials that are being used are of a very high quality, and the energy costs going forward within our developments are lower because that helps our lower income tenants and just our environmental impact in general. So we work very closely with Eagle staff all throughout the environmental review process to really, with our small environmental review staff, working closely with Eagle to make sure that, all throughout the development phases within housing, we're doing the appropriate, checks and making sure that the housing that we're helping to create is as healthy as possible and in very high opportunity areas when it relates to the site and the surrounding areas. So we're very pleased to be a part of the council and to be able to share, the housing perspective, because even in the areas of housing that we don't finance, we know that lower income people are generally in older homes that have other environmental impacts like lead-based paint impacts and other things like that, to where they're bearing the brunt of more environmental impacts than other groups. And we want to provide a voice for them and to try to make sure that we're doing as much as we can statewide to promote policies that improve people's housing conditions through all sorts of different areas, and the environmental impact and the safety of that housing long-term is first and foremost in our minds, and trying to make sure that housing is always at the forefront of these conversations, because it's a huge part of the impact of someone's livelihood, and how they interact in their community is the quality of their housing and what's around them in their environment, so that we know that if we're impacting someone's housing situation, we're impacting all aspects of their life to give them a better path forward for opportunity.
Thank you for that, Kelly. Can you talk a little bit about the programs that you are administering currently around housing?
Sure. So most of our financing activities relate to multifamily housing, so apartment communities and other things like that. So when we're investing either state or federal funds into housing development activities, it's typically in those larger scale apartment communities. So we have a few different funding programs. And then in our policy documents with that, we're really working to improve and sort of strengthen the environmental standards that we're placing within our housing developments to try to make sure that the materials that are being used are of the highest quality, as well as the environmental impacts going forward. And then we also assist a lot of people accessing rental homes through our Housing Choice Voucher program, and trying to make sure that if there's any lead exposure to children while in the home, that we're doing the correct assessments and being able to get folks moved into safer housing, so that if there are children with lead exposures, we're getting that handled and getting them relocated as soon as possible so that they are safe.
So thanks for that. There's a rental assistance program, I believe, that, and I don't know if that's what you just referenced, was that it? But for individuals versus financing, am I describing that correctly?
Yeah, one of the big programs we operate is called the Housing Choice Voucher Program. And we have almost 28,000 families that have their housing paid for via that program. It's a rental subsidy program, essentially. And through that program, we work very closely with DHHS in terms of making sure that if children have lead exposure, that we're getting that identified right away. So that we can either get it remediated, or if that's not going to happen in a timely fashion, getting that household moved into a home that's built after 1978, so that we don't have to worry about those lead exposures. So yes, I mean we're impacting the housing space in a couple different ways.
Thank you for that, Kelly. I appreciate that. I know that we have a few questions that have come in several different ways, some in our Q&A, some through the Whova app. I know the cool thing about the Whova app is folks can vote on the question that they'd also like to see answered. And so, and this isn't just for you, Kelly, this is a broader question, so I'll let you off the hook. I won't directly ask you this question, but I think this is a question more related to our work from the broader environmental justice spectrum. And it talks about Michigan's legacy as an industrial and manufacturing state, and the pollution that was kind of referenced earlier in terms of, excuse me, its impact on communities, and what are we doing to protect some of the poorest communities? And so I think that's a really important question, because it's at the heart of the work that we're doing right now. The goal is to find ways to lessen impact of what I call our industrial past. They're like the ghosts of our industrial past that have come back to haunt us, right? So it's really more about all of the work at our interagency table, all of the work that we're doing within Eagle, whether it is having some of the most stringent, PFAS regulations in the country, or whether it is how we're trying to address replacing lead-based infrastructure. Those are just some of the ways we're looking at historical and systemic things that have happened along the way that have put, poorest communities at a disadvantage. And so wanted to address that question and lift it up, because that's at the crux of what we do. And so later there's a session about our environmental justice screening tool that we are in the process of developing. That's all about being able to take a closer look at all the things in one place that communities face, so we can be very intentional about leveraging resources to address those challenges. And so I think those are examples of some of the things that really our work is all about. It's why we do what we do. I am not sure we have time to answer. We've got lots of questions. I will say I'm not sure we have time to answer them all in this session, but we will be answering your questions. So if you've put them in the chat or you've put them in Whova, we will send answers and be able to address those, because we have quite a few and we're almost right up on the hour. One quick question I do want to address is that if someone asks the question, what does Eagle do to try to improve equity in Michigan beyond just holding more public meetings? So I think public meetings are an important part of what we do, but it's not all of what is being done to really enhance our outreach. Last year, we did a new public participation policy, really designed to help the different divisions within Eagle who work with very different communities and some overlapping communities, look at how they can enhance that. I will be honest, it is a work in progress. We have not figured it all out, but the outreach from and advocacy from this office is layered on that. And we're trying to improve how we communicate, through what mechanism, in what languages, because that's all about enhancing equity. Last fall, we did a training for all Eagle employees on environmental justice and equity that Katie and I conducted. And it was all about not just learning what environmental justice is, what equity is, but how do you integrate it into the work that you do every day? Because what I've found is if you've done something the same way, it's hard to envision how to change that without a roadmap. And so we're working very intentionally within Eagle to be able to address how, not just the what, but the how. And Kara touched on this. We want to make sure that beyond the work of this office is integrated into how we do what we do. So I know we're right up on time. Thank you everyone for participating in this session. Thank you, Mona and Kara and Katie and Kelly, I've got a lot of K's going here, for your input. I know there was a lot more dialogue to be had and a lot. Again, we'll answer your questions. Hopefully you'll join us for the rest of the day, but thank you everyone for joining us.
Thanks everyone.
All right, thanks everybody. Just want to go over a couple housekeeping things as we get out of this session here. I want to thank you all for attending. And if you want, please choose the Rate Session app or the Rate Session button on your phone or on your laptop if you're watching it that way. If you're watching it through Whova, you can rate the session. I appreciate it if you do that. Also want to let you know that we already posted the welcoming session on the Whova app. If you go under the videos, you can find it there. We also posted several other videos under the videos button on your Whova app. You can watch some of them over lunch maybe. Our next session is at 1 o'clock. So Regina, do you have anything else to add before we take off?
No, just thank you, Jim. And hopefully folks will join us for our 1 o'clock session, which is focused on environmental justice at the highest levels and really looking at from the advisory and the department perspective, how the federal government's efforts intersect ours in terms of moving the needle on environmental justice. So thank you so much.
All right, thank you.